addition or something to supplement on what Sharad has already spoken with reference to the hyperparameters with reference to specifically k-means clustering, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, absolutely sure. Nitin, thank you so much for asking that. I'm sharing my screen. This is a cheat sheet which we have created with respect to k-means hyperparameters. While there are a few hyperparameters which exist here, there are a few, and we will have to discuss those. And probably I should say these are must-know things. For example, number of clusters. While you have scree plot, which is also called as elbow curve, while we also have silhouette metric, and a few other statistical ways of determining the number of clusters. One other way is square root of n by 2, where n is the number of data points. While we have all these techniques to determine the number of clusters, you are also expected to experiment with different number of clusters. If you look at scree plot, probably you might be, by looking at the plot, you might infer that maybe you need to run 3 clusters, or maybe 4 clusters, or maybe 5 clusters. You might be confused. In such a scenario, you need to experiment with all of those. With 4 clusters, with 3 clusters, with 5 clusters, you experiment. And look at which number of clusters is giving you the best result. On similar lines, we have another thing which is called as initialization. Each time you run k-means clustering algorithm, it is going to randomly select a few data points as cluster centroids or centers. Say you have 50 observations in your data set. And if you say, I want 3 clusters, then randomly 3 data points would be selected from those 50 observations that you have. Randomly 3 data points would be selected. And your clustering algorithm works with those 3 data points as reference points. When you run the algorithm again, a new set of 3 data points would be randomly selected as 3 cluster centroids or centers. And then the algorithm will continue running. If you execute once again, 3 different data points will be selected if you want 3 as a number of clusters. So which initialization would actually give you the best result? We are really not sure about that. And hence, by default, 10 times k-means algorithm would initialize the cluster centroids. This is yet another hyperparameter which people should be aware of. And you can experiment with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 100, 200, whatever number of initializations. Out of all of those, the best result would be displayed on your output console. And we have another hyperparameter, which is maximum iterations. While there are many, I would say 1, 2, 3 are the most important. So we would spend some time on the most important hyperparameters because this session itself is about hyperparameters. Okay. You need to remember what are the default values from the interview standpoint. When people ask you on what are the various hyperparameters which you are aware of when it comes to k-means clustering, while there are many, you should at least be able to talk about a few, if not all. So we have maximum iterations. So what happens with respect to k-means clustering is that in one iteration, you might have a data point here, which belongs to this cluster. And say you have this cluster. And let me talk about a data point here. So this data point might belong to this cluster in the next iteration. So this might change like this. And in the next iteration, once again, this data point might belong to this cluster because of the centroid positions. So this would get into an infinity loop. So one iteration, this data point belongs to this cluster. Next iteration, this data point will belong to this cluster. This would go on and on in infinite loop. To break that, we provide this, which is called as maximum iterations. And the default value is 300. That means after 300 iterations, it would stop. The algorithm would stop. It would not proceed further. Okay. So these are a few things that you need to remember, and verbose and verbose is something which is most commonly used. If you give 0, that means it will not give you a lot of information onto the output console. If you say 1, some additional information will be displayed onto your output console. If you say 2, huge amount of information would be displayed onto your output console about the algorithm. That's pretty trivial stuff. But I would say these three, number of clusters, number of initializations, and the maximum iterations, these are the three things which everyone should be aware of when it comes to k-means clustering. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.